Welcome, Wargamers, to the very suddenly dragon-filled skies of the Mortal Realms, because today we are talking about the two new dragon characters added in the most recent edition of the Stormcast Eternals Battletome, and that is, of course, Krondys, son of Draconith, and Karazai, the Scarred, remnants of a long-forgotten race brought to the point of extinction, but they are back and looking for revenge. Now, for those of you who are new to Age of Sigmar or this particular faction, there's an interesting story part of the Stormcast Eternal lore that's been there from the beginning. Was this idea that Sigmar, very early on, befriended a god beast known as Draconith. He is the OG father of all the dragons and dragon-adjacent creatures. Now, I say adjacent because he also has close ties to the Seraphon, without it being made clear if the old ones were dragons per se. There's obviously a clear, strong connection, but it's a little bit vague on exactly how deep that goes. But we've seen the fruits of this, friendship and bond between Sigmar and Draconith before, specifically with the Extremis Chamber. And this is some OG stuff back from the Realm Gate Wars when AOS first launched, because as the Chaos Forces were, learning about the Stormcast Eternals, they started to hide behind these huge mega fortresses. They fortified realm gates, important strategic locations, and that kind of stuff. And so Sigmar needed a way to smash through those walls. Because up to that point, he just had a whole bunch of infantry models for sale, I guess, for us. And they just could not handle the walls. So the Extremis Chamber finally linked the Stormcast Eternals to a specific breed of Draconith's children, imaginatively called Dracoths. But basically, these are the tiny dragons, like the perfect mount size for Stormcast, but they don't have any wings. They are, however, still children of Draconith and part of Azir. So, just for really quick reference, the Extremis Chamber, when that came down, that's how you get the Star Drakes, that's how you get like the Fulminators and all those kinds of things. And so you may be asking, Doug, we're here to talk about two dragon characters, why are you bringing up the Extremis Chamber and all that? And my goal is to paint the picture of the strong relevance between dragon races and the forces of order. Because with the latest set of Battletomes, both Stormcast Eternals and the Orc War Clans, we learn that their role, the dragons' roles, as honorable defenders or just generally good presence in the mortal realms goes back way further than their debut on the table with an Extremis Chamber. Broken Realms Kragnos introduced us to a world before chaos that was no less full of strife. And so I'll summarize that story here for super simplicity's sake. Long ago, in the Age of Myth, two races really thrived in the wilds of Gur. One was the Draconith Empire, which we don't know a ton about, but it seems to be pretty simple, like what you see on the tin, right? An entire kingdom of dragons, I assume a mix of subspecies, but I'm not really quite sure. The other dominant race were the Draugr. These are the centaur-like man-beasts from which Kragnos hails. Now, the story of Kragnos is best kept for a dedicated video, which I have made before, and I'll try to remember to link that in the description below. But essentially, he was just too dang ambitious for his own good, and he sought more and more power. Every obstacle wasn't this invigorating challenge that sent him over the edge, and he slowly connected power, interacted with gods themselves, and eventually attained a semi-deity status of his own. And, seeking a real challenge to his might, he turned his attention to the Draconith Empire. Now, it's important to note that Kragnos' father, the chieftain of the Draugr, established a non-aggression pact with the Draconith Empire, as they all understood that both people groups are so immensely powerful that a war between them would just bring nothing but devastation. But Kragnos, in his ignorance and honestly his ambition, defied his father and went on a genocidal purge of the Draconith. None could stand against him and his personal guard. It was like he was on his own personal quest for glory. And this action, this just rolling up to the Draconith Empire and just devastating it, set off a series of events that saw dragons become super rare in the mortal realms. But it also forced the hand of the Seraphon to deal with Kragnos. And this is where we get the bit where Lord Croak basically tricked him into getting eaten by a mountain, and that's where he was until he was released in Broken Realms Kragnos. So that's everything that we really know about the Draconith Empire and the Draugr and that kind of stuff. But that's all old news, right? What about these two guys that we got seemingly out of nowhere? Well, these two dragons are the only known, as the time of recording, Draconith of their kind to survive all this time. They are members of the original Draconith Empire that was almost brought to extinction. And to be honest, there's not a ton of lore on them, but they represent some lasting memory of the importance of this event. I mean, if Kragnos is, a man out of time, he was pulled from his own time and kind of frozen in place until the world changed all around him and then released, these are also creatures out of time. And so let's take a quick look at the very brief amounts of lore that we get on each of them, and then just have a cool discussion about them. We're going to start off our conversation talking about Krondys, the son of Dracothian. At least that's his title. See, Krondys, along with his brother, Karazai, once ruled the Draconith Empire. They were essentially princes and scholars, and they took up an interest in lore that eventually led them to learning of the Slaan's existence, as well as how to telepathically communicate with them. So I just imagine this, Draconith Empire is doing its own thing. They're good, upstanding citizens, and they realize, oh man, we have some distant, relatives in the Seraphon who have been around this whole time. Let's try and reach out to them. And that's really all we have the information on him as far as pre-Kragnos coming in and wrecking everything. We know that they were princes that somehow in some capacity ruled or were part of the ruling class of the Draconith Empire. And then when Kragnos came in and destroyed everything and just killed everyone that they love, Krondys went away. He basically just got disenfranchised with the universe, which I can relate to, and then ran away far away to Azir to just kind of watch and mope and mourn, all those kinds of things that he just needed to do. He was aware of Sigmar and his pantheon, but he avoided contact, of these new forces in fear of old emotional wounds being reopened. He sat there and observed the cleansing of Azir, meaning when the doors were shut in the Age of Chaos and Sigmar had this huge cleansing and purge of the entire realm that was quite devastating. And he actually helped along with this at some points too. He would just randomly pop down into a fight that the forces of order were struggling with and just nuke the bad guys, essentially. He would pop in every once in a while and help Lord Commander Bastian Carthalos. And he kind of developed a mutual respect for him, but he wasn't personally engaged. He would just kind of get bored and go help out every once in a while. When the Stormcast Eternals marched off to start, invading the realms in mass, so think the Gates of Azir book or the Rumgate Wars timeline, Krondys decided to become sort of like a hermit and just kind of watch over the younger races and protect the outer wilds of Azir from all the dangerous things that lurk there. It's not just chaos, there's also just crazy monsters and stuff like that. And he was content to just sit on the sidelines and kind of just be a known entity that was sort of reserved and removed from the events of the mortal realms until Kragnos' escape, and which then started what we now know as the Era of the Beast. Once Kragnos was freed and this was all happening over again, there's no avoiding, previous wounds and emotional scars. We need to deal with him. And so he reached out to the Seraphon, again, whom he had some connection with, and asked them to release all of the Draconith raised in their vessels and their ships, and chose to reunite with his long-lost brother, Karazai. Now, there's not a whole lot of information on why the Seraphon had a whole bunch of Draconith on board. Maybe they just, took away the dragon eggs to ensure that some part of their race would survive. I'm not quite sure. That's a story that I would really love to know more about. But, along with his brother Karazai, he presented himself before Sigmar, and they had just this super long council that was mediated by star drakes. Again, they're all intelligent creatures. And they swore the Pact Draconis for the union of Stormcast and Draconith, resulting in the formation of the first Storm Drake Guard. These are the newest models that we get, where there's actually a Stormcast riding a flying Dracoth rather than the on-foot version which we had before. Now, regarding Krondys, one other thing to note is that he is an incredibly powerful spellcaster, and that power was further amplified by an item that he wears on his chest called the Regalia Fulmentaris. Basically, Krondys directed the forging of this arcane centerpiece, this mantle that he wears, using smithing arts known only to the Draconith Empire. And it's sort of a dual thing of focusing his arcane power, so he's a great spellcaster, but then also it's sort of like a symbol of the union between Stormcast Eternals and the Draconith in general. And that's really all we know about Krondys, and now we're going to shift our focus to talk about Karazai the Scarred, his brother. Well, his brother, basically survived all of the same pitfalls that Krondys did. What we get the sense of, though, personality-wise, is that Karazai is a bit more bitter. He's more conniving. He wants control. He wanted power. I think he was much more of a politics kind of gamer back in the day when everything was good. Maybe he was like looking for his own way to leadership and get respect and control. But, of course, Kragnos coming in and destroying the entire empire he knows and everyone he loves kind of blew that plan out of the water. He was there assisting Krondys in getting Kragnos trapped inside the mountain, the Twin Horn Peak, and everything went according to plan until, at the last second, Kragnos swung his giant dread mace and basically sliced straight into Karazai's side. That's why he has this huge gaping scar and like wound across his entire body, which I think is super cool. And after Kragnos was sealed, a grief-stricken Krondys went into exile, but Karazai, instead of mourning, he just turned straight to rage, and he went on a straight-up murder crusade all across the followers of Kragnos, across Gur, poured it into other realms. When chaos came in, he was just like, okay, more stuff to kill, and he just dove head into, fighting greenskins and demons and all these kinds of things. And this millennia of war, and the essence of Gur making everything more hunty and predatory, twisted this once glorious form of a Draconith prince and led him to becoming a fully abandoned, just murder machine. He even gave up sorcery. Like if in the tabletop, he doesn't really have access to any kind of magics because he's done with that. Those were at the heights of intellectualism and cultural superiority for him when he was part of the Draconith Empire, and like that side of his life is done. He's like, me? No. I kill stuff now. That's all I do. Now, when the era of the Beast came and Kragnos was released, Krondys came back, of course, and showed up, and the two of them have a very tentative kind of peace. Like they're not going to hurt each other or kill each other. They're brothers, and they are the last of their kind, at least from that particular empire. But he doesn't really like Krondys. He doesn't really like anybody. He's agreed to join, the pact that was made, the Pact Draconis, and go and fight alongside the Stormcast, but he doesn't commit to leading any of them. So, like, a Stormcast army will just be out there randomly fighting, greenskins or chaos or death or whatever, and Karazai will just swoop in. They can't account for him, they can't, plan on him being anywhere, they can't depend on him, but he'll just show up and murder a whole bunch of things. He does harbor quite a bit of resentment towards Krondys. He says that he's a senile fool that retreated in shame and only fights alongside him to basically outmatch him, to be like, I'm the better successor to our broken empire than you will ever be. And there's this kind of like darkness to him where, everyone's happy to have him around fighting on their side, but he's also just this angry, brooding machine of murder. So like everyone kind of keeps him at arm's length. I just imagine like a City of Sigmar Free Guild guy, he's looking at the enemy camp being like, oh man, we got to fight that tomorrow. And he looks over and he sees Karazai the Scarred, who's just like literally staring at him, ready to murder his face off. And he's just like, this seems like a rock in a hard place, right? He just makes everybody uneasy. Karazai carries a vibe with him. But what's interesting though, and what I think I do like that they added, was that the younger, more impetuous, like Draconith, whether that's the drakes that can fly or the Dracoth on ground, they really respect Karazai's, first of all, desire to fight, and their immature passions and impetus to get into the combat, really the thick of it, sees them really loving and respecting him, which is great because that's all he wants. He wants the respect, he wants the adoration. And so these like hot-headed youths within Dragonspeak really are attracted to that. Now, I have some thoughts on these two characters that I would love to share, and I'm going to do that right after a quick word about the channel. Hey everybody, Doug here, and in case you didn't know, I am working on making a miniatures game of my own. Recently, I became one of the 3 co-founders for the game Legacy of Atmos. It's not launched yet, we're still in development phase, but it is a great skirmish game that promises to deliver on this unique blend of narrative and tactical play and the ways that you can carry on a story of skirmish game battle across different regions of an entire map. We've got some great people helping us with game design, we got some cool models, some wonderful art, and honestly I'm putting this out there because I could use your help too. If you ever wanted to get in on the ground floor when it comes to playtesting or, writing the lore and that kind of thing, we could absolutely use some assistance with that. As mentioned before, we do have some cool models as well available for you as STLs at the moment, and you can check all those things out in the links in the description down below. It would mean the world to me if you would check it out, support the project, support me and the channel. It would just all be incredibly awesome. So thank you so much for your time, and now back to the show. So let's end this video like I end all of them and talk about why I think these characters are so cool. First off, I like the fact that they represent elements that are from far back in the realm's history, right? We got Krondys, which introduced us to this whole historical element of what the realms were like way before the timeline that we currently know. And adding these dragons is sort of like a counter response to that. It's an old feud and both sides were involved. And I'll admit, I thought their lore entries were pretty weak in terms of we don't know a lot about them, how they perceive the world, and what they want out of it. But I will say, it's a better reason for named characters to show up than we usually get in the Stormcast Eternals book, right? I mean, I'd love more ancient characters as it fills out the ancient world more, but most of the time it's just like, hey, here's Astria Soulbright, and we're all like, nobody asked for an Astria Soulbright. She's cool, but she doesn't do anything. She doesn't show up anywhere. So at least these guys have some connection, at least to the history of the realms, as well as their arch enemy in the Cruel Boys. Now, when I read the Battletome, it gives me the sense that Karazai was always sort of like a Loki character, like sort of an always like plotting, scheming, not inherently like chaotic evil type thing, but that he wasn't quite as noble and regal as Krondys was, who was like this, paladin and character of unmatched purity. And this is where I think like the introduction of these two characters kind of fumbles, because I think it would be much more interesting if they were both paragons of good and Karazai got bitter and Krondys ran away. Like, I think these two could have been a great allegory or a parallel to the story of Sigmar in the Age of Myth. Because Sigmar ran away and sealed his doors, much like Krondys did, right? Krondys just removed himself from the realms functionally and hid away. But the alternative was to stay and fight, but he lost everything. If Sigmar would have kept the gates open and tried fighting, he would have lost everything. Azir would have been overrun, and he would have been just nothing. He would become grizzled and defeated and mad as time and armies grind everything away from him. But as is, he's sort of like a Loki copycat. It's kind of a dubious villain that has some heroic elements to him, kind of an anti-hero. But I don't know. I just feel like there was more potential there for writing that in. And maybe that will absolutely happen once they have a dedicated book and novel and things like that, assuming we get those. Regardless, I wanted to present the information that we do have about these characters because they are really cool. I mean, they're exceptional models for sure. But like every, Stormcast Eternals named character, I just want to see more. I want to see them in context. I'd love to see some short stories of them just chatting and interacting with one another, planning something, whether it's like how they even perceive the eve of battle and stuff like that. There's a lot of great conversations there. I just think their characters need to be filled out a little bit more. So anyway, friends, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Krondys, son of Draconith, and Karazai, the Scarred, and let me know your thoughts on their backstory, how they connect to Krondys, and what you'd like to see them do in future books. Let me know in the comments down below, and I will chat with you there. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and happy wargaming.